I'm Chris Dutchko, co-host of the Ninth Grade Experience podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Toby J. Karten. Toby is an educator who has focused on the field of special education. She also is an author, and our focus is her book, The Admire Framework for Inclusion, Positive Strategies that Pave the Way for Students of All Abilities. You're going to learn so much today. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do that, you ask? Glad you asked. I got 3 ways. 1, you could tell a friend and share links. 2, you could go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, you could click on the link on my website homepage to buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you could donate $1 or 2 or more, to help address the costs associated with producing the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
And I've written this book to give a framework to teachers because a lot of times professionals get overwhelmed by so much jargon and so many have-tos that they lose sight of the fact that here's a framework.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Toby J. Karten is an experienced educator who has worked in the field of special education since 1976. As an
Did you have to do that year, Steve? Yes, I have.
No, I don't have to. I don't. Do you want me to do that again?
No, that's okay. I think it's important that we have new teachers and teachers with decades of experience because we learn from each other. I'm sorry for interrupting my own bio. My apologies.
All is good. All is good. She's an accomplished author and researcher who has presented successful staff development to local, national, and international audiences. Toby is an adjunct professor and graduate instructor at Monmouth University and the Regional Training Center, which is affiliated with the College of New Jersey and LaSalle University. She has been a resource teacher, staff developer, adult educator, and inclusion consultant in New York, New Jersey, and Texas schools, and in many other districts nationally and globally for students and educators in grades pre-K through 12 and beyond. Toby has authored several books and resources about inclusion practices, which are currently used for instruction on many college and university campuses and in schools throughout the world. She earned an undergraduate degree in special education from Brooklyn College, a Master of Science in Special Education from the College of Staten Island, a supervisory degree from Georgian Court University, and an honorary doctorate from Gratz College. Our focus today is Toby's book, The Admire Framework for Inclusion, Positive Strategies that Pave the Way for Students of All Abilities. Toby, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Steve, and thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast, Teaching, Learning, and Leading. And I think that as professionals, that's what we do. So I'm delighted to be here, and together we'll share some insights with our listeners.
Well, this is awesome. Glad to have you here. And, our focus today is your book, The Admire Framework for Inclusion, Positive Strategies that Pave the Way for Students of All Abilities. In your introduction, you say this: attitudes and actions influence results. All right, so could you talk about what you're referring to?
Thank you so much for starting with that question, because that begins the program for students to be included, that positive attitude, which was also in the title of my book, because there are negativities that some people tend to focus on, which thwarts development and growth. But teachers, positive attitudes, students, positive attitudes, families, positive attitudes. I'm not saying we delete realities. Realities exist. Students' levels exist. But if I say something like, and I'll just sum it up with a short sentence, Steve, can do, will do, and here's how.
I love it. I love it. When I saw that sentence, I'm like, oh, we got to talk about this. So this is so cool. All right. So we got to, you wrote this book. I mean, you've written other books, but you wrote this book. Why'd you write it?
Well, the Admire framework values how individuals capitalize on one another's strength through the growth paradigm, which I think is so important, and the ability within the inclusion classroom, how it's set up. And teachers are hungry. I love being a coach on school campuses because I'll say one thing and another teacher or a paraprofessional or administrator or a family member will say, well, what if I blank? And then it's not my idea, it's our idea. And I've written this book to give a framework to teachers because a lot of times professionals get overwhelmed by so much jargon and so many have-tos that they lose sight of the fact that here's how, here's a framework. And that's exactly what the Admire framework does. And going back to the title, I want to pave a way for students to succeed. Yeah, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but here's some strategies and supports that will be proactive rather than inactive and have in place. So I wrote the book to help us, to help students who need to help themselves.
Very nice. I love it. It's an awesome topic too, because I want to say this as a former high school principal and worked with the different departments and doing observations as well as that. One of the things that, is definitely needed is this idea about, talking about the role of inclusion teachers and how they can be helped and suggestions to help make what they do better, that type of thing. And I love that. Could you give everyone an overview of what Admire stands for? Because it's not just the word, it's each letter stands for something. So
Yes. And it's an acrostic in a way that simplifies it, and it's not a simple subject, and it's not meant to happen just on Monday morning, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and onward throughout the weeks and throughout a child's life to prepare them to be a successful participant of the adult community. So the Admire framework is the basis for the strategies in the book presented, and it lists 65 actions under the acronym Admire. And the acronym Admire stands for to assess and activate, decide and delineate, model and monitor, instruct and involve, reflect and revise, and engage and enrich. And within that, there are 65 different actions to put us in that positive direction. So as example, we want to assess and activate students' prior knowledge and their prior successes and capitalize upon that. Whether it's the working memories, such as the reason I did the Admire, because sometimes we're burdened by so many different strategies, but I wanted to put it under this specific umbrella for engaging students and deciding on the learning targets and delineating the step-by-step actions, modeling evidence-based practices, universal design for learning, and instructing and involving things like differentiated instruction and visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile elements, and giving ways that we reflect and revise maybe the objectives and the pacing and thinking about discrete task analysis, breaking it up a little bit and engaging and enriching creativity. Students with IEPs are creative, but we have to give them the opportunity to show what they know. And then inclusion also means the higher level kids. So this book addresses the kids with IEPs, the kids without IEPs, because together we're peers. And that's hopefully what happens in our society when schools are equipped with a framework such as the Admire one, where they're not frustrated or stigmatizing kids because of their labels, but they're promoting advancement. So I want us to admire, and I love the word admire.
Oh, that's awesome. It fits so well, and it's just It actually is. It's cool. I'm always impressed by someone who can come up with, a good word that then the words stand for something. Connecting it like that, because I always come up with dumb words.
No, I love when the kids come up with words.
Yes,
when
yes.
It's out on a school campus, I would love when I was working with some small group instruction. And one kid just turned to me one day and said, www.erosion. I said, okay, it was a science lesson. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, wind, water, weathering. It wasn't my strategy, it was theirs. So we model. That's one of the initials, what the acronym stands for. And that's what I hope we're doing with our listeners today, Steve.
That's so cool. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit out of a couple of your chapters and and focus on those. So let's start the beginning. Let's start chapter 1. It's called What Students and Staff Need to Know. And it starts with a section called Common Myths About Inclusion. Could you talk about a few of these? Love this chapter.
Absolutely. I think that sometimes when we see something written, we become afraid that that is going to happen. Like one myth might be that it's not appropriate for students with disabilities. Inclusion is appropriate, but we have to put that framework in and have the supports there to be proactive in setting up that environment. Another myth, inclusion is too expensive. Actually not. Research says it's an effective use of funds. And that's something to keep in mind, that the Department of Education provides services for students and make sure that rights are protected. And you gave the date in my bio, okay? And I started when it was PL 94-142, the EHA, and we had to have a law that said all kids could learn, and here's how, and here's what they need. And I think that that's important. And another myth is that it places a burden on teachers. That happens if they're not prepared with the strategies. That's why professional development is essential. That's why students need teachers who are prepared to teach them. And the another myth, inclusion only benefits the kids with disabilities. Wrong. I would love when I would do disability awareness programs on school campuses. And I remember I had a speaker in a wheelchair, Stanley Soden, and he was from DATE, Disability Awareness Through Education. And he would come in his wheelchair. In the back of his wheelchair, he had the bumper sticker, Harley Davidson. And he said, ask me a question. And one of the kids looked at him and said, do all your friends have wheelchairs? And letting students think and develop, rather than saying, here are the facts you have to memorize, but exposing students in an inclusion classroom to people who maybe aren't identical to them. But guess what? That kid in the wheelchair might teach me how to draw. Everyone has strength. And I think inclusion, one of the myths is it dilutes the curriculum. No, it strengthens the curriculum for everyone.
Yeah, it's so awesome. And I had the good fortune of working as a teacher on a team of teachers that we were in a high school where we had these teams in the 9th and 10th grade. And we were, our team had an inclusion focus. So we had a special education teacher attached to the team. And one of the things that was so cool was that the kids saw him not as something like some category of teacher. They saw him as, hey, we got 5 teachers on our team. And it was the coolest thing. I would hear them say stuff like that. Why don't you guys have 5 teachers?
And when, the kids with the IEPs watch the kids without IEPs ask me questions. So it's like, they don't know something too. Or I put out a graphic organizer and I would just put it on a strategy table and say, whoever needs it can take it.
Nice.
So we're not singling out kids. We're including everyone. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but maybe I do, Steve. We complicate things too much sometimes.
That we do. Yes. Good stuff. All right. So moving forward in chapter 2, titled Think Individuals, Not Categories, you have a section, Admire Exceptionality as a Difference, not a deficit, definition, or limitation. What do you want the reader to understand after reading this chapter?
Yeah, it's not going to magically happen that the child is physically included and they're going to learn, okay? Without things like activating class routines and norms. So the norm might be whole part whole. We're together for the whole part in like 10-minute section. We're going to break up into parts, and then we're going to get together as a whole to celebrate the learning, whether we're learning about Johnny Appleseed or mitosis. It goes from pre-K through graduate level. Also, delineate and decide which students will have which collaborative roles. That's important. Students are peers with one another within cooperative learning. You can't just say get into groups without giving them certain structure within that groups. And we as teachers, we model expectations. We instruct with differentiation, representations, different engagements. And it's okay if you sing a song to demonstrate your knowledge of fractions. It's also okay if you want to draw a picture, and maybe you just want to read a paragraph about it and answer multiple choice questions. But we're going to do things that instruct and assess and reflect with the appropriate objectives, pacing, and enriching knowledge of what we know about kids who may be under that label, but they're not their label. We don't want to stigmatize or cap potential. We want to have that strength paradigm. And that's what I'd really like everyone to do, is to admire exceptionality, not as a deficit, a definition, or a limitation. It's what the student's level might be at this moment. And it doesn't mean that that defines how high they could go. I love when someone of short stature was asked to say what their height was, and he said, "My height is measured from the top of my head to the sky."
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I love that.
That's awesome. In Chapter 3, it's titled Connect to the Realities That Teachers, Students, and Families Face. In this chapter, you introduce the reader to a learner profile, and I love this. You even have a learner profile reproducible. Could you talk about why the learner profile is important to use?
Oh, yeah. How much time do we have here? Yes. I love my learner profiles, and so do the teachers, because it's kind of like, I hate to say this, but like, the Cliff Notes or the cheat sheet that they could go to quickly. And, whether a student is raised on a farm or in an urban community, maybe one kid likes tractors, maybe another kid, is interested in the bodega, they're all things that are familiar to them. So part of the profile, you include their strengths and challenges, their interests and likes. You include what the IEP goals are, whether that's turn taking or paying attention, or maybe phonemic awareness. But then we also include possible accommodations and modifications. So we don't have to be grasping for things, but we think about things in a way that we are capitalizing upon people's strengths. And that doesn't have to be real complicated, but it has to be where we engage and re-enrich students on their level of social and emotional and academic performance. So that is something that we need to be cognizant of. Where are they at now? And then we do that again, maybe in 4 to 6 weeks, another type of assessment, which doesn't always have to be written, but we delineate what our next learning targets are. We decide on what's going to happen next. And notice I keep using the pronoun we. It's not just one person's decision. I'm working with another teacher. I'm working with an occupational therapist, a speech and language pathologist, the admin, the family, the student himself, because that's something that metacognition. Let's take our students on the journey with us. Let them be cognizant of where they need to go, because they are willing partners, but they just need strategies too to admire.
Oh, I love it. Love it. This is awesome. And I got to say this, Toby, you have this incredible energy for for what you're talking about, and it is incredible. So thank you.
Hey, you saw that passion that keeps me writing, Steve,
Yes.
and keeps me doing this, because I love when audiences and I go to presentations and on campuses, and they're hungry for ideas. And these are research evidence-based. This is not the flavor of the month. This is what kids need. And this is what we need to do.
Very much so. That's awesome. All right. So throughout the book, you have included reproducibles. One of these is a recurring template called admiring, and it has part of the chapter in its title. So in the case of chapter 4, which is called Practice Supportive Classroom Management, the template is called Admiring Supportive Classroom Management Practices. What are you hoping the reader will take away from using the admiring templates throughout the book?
Yeah, it's part of that framework, because when we think about this, and not every blank of every producible needs to be filled in. I say that all the time to teachers. This is not, I get this many points,
Right.
It doesn't have an asterisk like, on a Google form, it won't get submitted if it's not. But I know, like, if I go shopping, right? And I want to get A, B, C, D, E, whether it's eggs, I don't know how much they are, a dozen now, right? But whatever I'm purchasing, I feel overwhelmed if it's just in my head and it's not on paper, concrete. It goes back to some of the basic principles of special ed: concrete, representational, abstract. So the reproducibles there are intended to map out a course to follow. I get in my car, I need to go to Boston, I'm going to put it in my Waze, or maybe Google Maps, or maybe I have something that I'm holding, a piece of paper, because I have to know ahead of time the journey. So that's what I hope the reproducibles do with the Admire framework in each chapter, to remind us of those action words, right? How will we assess and activate prior knowledge? How will we decide and delineate on the specific structures that we're using? How will we model and monitor, instruct and involve, reflect, and guess what? Revise. We as professionals, we don't get it right the first time. Mistakes are not mistakes. Mistakes are valuable information that tells us maybe what we need to tweak or do differently. There's a bumpy road, we need to pave it. And that's an important thing. And we want to engage and enrich all learners within that inclusion environment. So the reproducibles are meant to ease that journey, to admire what takeaways you are getting from each chapter. And the takeaways should never stay on the paper. The takeaways are meant to be living in the classroom.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. This is so cool. All right. So in chapter 5, titled Inclusion Challenges Generate Solutions, there is a segment titled Innovations, Inventions, and Solutions. And you say this: challenges often lead to innovations, inventions, and solutions. Could you talk about this? I really like this chapter.
Yeah. It's very important that we acknowledge that it's not an easy journey, but that doesn't mean we get frustrated and say, I give up. And that goes for professionals, that goes for students, that goes for all community partners, because together we have students thrive, and it's experiential. So I do silly stuff in this chapter, like I have a toothpick challenge. And it's a little bit frustrating. And I don't like Rich Lavoie did this, Fat City, if you remember, a long time ago: frustration, anxiety, tension, and I'm giving up, right? But there are also solutions. And it makes you look at things through different perspectives, because there are always barriers, but those barriers make us stronger. And as professionals, to figure out other ways to do things. And, that it doesn't have to be real complicated. I remember my first year teaching in a place called Brooklyn, where I graduated. And it was a school that none of the kids belonged in the public school system. Okay, so they for different reasons: academic, social, emotional. And I remember one kid said something mean to another kid, and they were ready to fight. right? So I don't know, what did I do in my wisdom? They still had chalk in those days, right? So on the board, I write, big deal, so what? And the kid looks up. I don't know, is that a strategy? But maybe it was a solution. It stopped the students in the moment and made them do one of the acronyms, reflect, and maybe revise their behavior. And that's what we need to do. Today we have PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, which are in the book. And that's something that we need to think about, how solutions and maybe anticipating what might happen. And that's part of that UDL approach, Universal Design for Learning, that says that there are going to be different avenues to take. And we're going to have this set up for the student who didn't get it this way. Maybe he, she, or they will be able to learn it this way. So John Dewey was very big in that, experiential learning. We learn by doing. We learn through a process. And, you know, sometimes examples and non-examples are also ways that we could move forward. You know, we don't have to be thwarted by what might not work at day one, but use that to proceed in day two and beyond.
Awesome. Later in your book, in chapter 6, which is called Manage Inclusion Anxiety. So what is inclusion anxiety?
Ouch. Yes. Worry, fear, panic, embarrassment, stress, discomfort. And that goes for the educators, the administrators, families, students, peers. If we allow that anxiety to define us, we can't move forward. So that also leads to a type of wellness, and to differentiate and to get students to move forward in a way that's getting them to understand and delineate and define empathy and the adaptations as the class norm for those who know more, for those who know less, without any perceived pecking order, you know, going back to the other chapter, without being thwarted by the barriers inside or outside school, and to instruct and involve different perspectives. And there are many resources in the book that help us to diminish the anxiety. Sometimes the anxiety doesn't disappear on day one, but it's a process. It's kind of like, I never said this before, but chiseling away the factors that are going to thwart moving ahead. And that means that we want to increase academic performance and decrease absenteeism, which might result because of the anxiety, and increase the motivation to succeed for all students within that inclusive environment.
Excellent. And, you know, it's all you have to do is participate in that inclusion environment to get that feel that, you can, that there would be some anxiety and how to help that go away. And I really like what you're talking about.
That's healthy, Steve, right?
Right.
The anxiety.
Very much so.
If you channel it, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. I definitely agree with you, and I like what you're talking about there in chapter 6. So we're getting close to finishing up, and I love the book, but you also have something else to go along with the book, which is you have your own podcast, and it's called Karten's Inclusion Conversations. And I've been listening. A couple of my favorites: Teaching Together, The Power of Co-Teaching and Supportive Coaching. And another one, this one, Play-Based Learning, Unlocking Potential in Preschoolers. And you got a whole bunch more. Could you share a little bit about your podcast?
I'd love to. Thank you. And you might get an invite to be a guest as well, reciprocal. That would be a lovely thing.
That would be nice.
I'm in season 3. I feel that just this week, I interviewed 2 people I met at a charter school in New York City in the Bronx. And it was a school that focused on also basketball, because those were the kids' strengths, And the individuals I meet when I do presentations, when I'm on school campuses, have a wealth of knowledge. And in Karten's Inclusion Conversations, my goal is for us to spread the word, hummingbird. I've said that many times. And that happens through these types of podcasts, through forums such as yours, and where we're teaching, learning, leading each other and coaching each other to be better. And KIC is meant to be that, having conversations. There always doesn't have to be agreement, but there have to be voices that need to be heard. And those voices in those conversations might put across an idea that somebody was thinking about, but now hearing someone else verbalizing it who has experienced it within the school campus is very valuable. And the rationale for my podcast is let's have a conversation and learn from each other as we're doing now. So thank you for asking about it. It's available on most forums. I don't know, Buzzsprout, Amazon Music. I don't know. I'm learning about podcasts and things like that. I could give you the link for it.
That'd be awesome. And I'll put it in my show notes, because that's what I'm getting ready to ask is, where can our listeners find additional information, connect, and learn more? Where do you want to send them besides the podcast?
Yeah, I would love, I'm going to send you some of my favorite links that I have. I have my website too, inclusionworkshops.com. And I have tools and resources on there. The Admire Framework is one of the books that I've written for Solution Tree. And it's a labor of love. Every time I do a book, it makes me go into the research more. It makes me learn more. I belong to places like Council for Exceptional Children, Learning Forward, LDA, Learning Disabilities Association. There are so many good organizations and advocacy groups out there, whether it's ARC or whether it's in the United States or Canada or Europe or Africa. Wherever we are, we learn from each other. And that's something that as professionals, we could never stop doing. So you asked for a few ways to hop on and learn more. You will get those, Steve, and I'm delighted to share those with our listening audience.
Awesome. And I'll include that in the show notes, and very cool. So I got one last question for you, Toby, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it, and what would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
There are so many teachers that made me want to be a teacher. I'm going to pick a middle school teacher, Mr. Weiss, social studies teacher. And I'll tell you what my research paper was. Compare and contrast the civilizations of the Nile and Mesopotamia, showing how they're a product of cultural invention and diffusion. Huh? As a seventh grader, I came home crying. But then I dissected that and I figured out each part of it. How did I do that? Because it's constructivist learning, and we learn, and sometimes we zone a proximal development. We set it just a little bit harder from what students need. And that's what the Admire framework is about. And that's what Mr. Weiss kind of taught me. He also taught me how to fold the New York Times a certain way if I was reading it on the subway. And I remembered this because he modeled it, and he showed it certain ways. And I think that's the point I want to bring across, is that he challenged me to do things. And when I'm talking about the Admire framework, we're not spoon feeding information to students. We are challenging them to be who they are in the best framework. And that's something that sometimes students need supports, whether they have IEPs or not. They need teachers who are smiling and have those attitudes that say, every student can succeed, and maybe making that within an inclusive classroom is a beautiful thing, because, as far as I know, there are no separate lines in the supermarket for the kids with IEPs, for the kids without IEPs. We're all together in this thing called life, and let's prepare each other to move forward in such a positive direction.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. Toby, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, The Admire Framework for Inclusion, Positive Strategies that Pave the Way for Students of All Abilities. Helpful, practical, so much awesome information. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me as a guest here. I appreciate all that you do as well.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching Learning Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching Learning Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.